And welcome to the Fast Take. I'm Rod Rodriguez. I've got Jack Murphy here, who brought us this amazing part one of our Future Wars series on Russia and the Ukraine. Folks, when you listen to that episode, I did talk about how important it was to reference the time frame in which those interviews were recorded. So those interviews were recorded, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was prior to this major engagement. We're about 2 weeks removed from when you originally captured those interviews. A lot has changed since then.
Yeah, we may even be more than a few weeks removed at this point, but those interviews provide a solid foundation and base for, I think, everything that is unfolding now in real time and everything that we will be doing here on Military Matters in the future. And to be clear, my original idea, my thought for this series on Russia was going to be similar to the series on China that we did, where it focused on a big picture geopolitics episode and then an episode about their intelligence gathering capabilities and their military capabilities each. And, current events have overtaken that plan. And so now we're sort of reacting in real time. But I think that it results in some very topical information.
That's interesting because when we originally talked about our Future War series, we had thrown a couple of countries up on the list of folks of countries that we wanted to discuss. We discussed China. Russia was always one that we wanted to tackle. We knew this was going to be a big one. Now, since our original season 5 planning meetings, Russia has invaded the Ukraine. They did the thing that I think a lot of folks were not that sure they were going to do. They were like, well, if they do this, there's so many consequences. There's no way they're going to invade the Ukraine. They're going to posture. I think a lot of us did. We all thought this was insane. At some point, the Russians are going to pack up their toys and go back. They'll have made a point, and they will go back to business as usual. They didn't. They went into a full-scale invasion. They're doing their thing. But the shock that I think that you and I both share is the ineptitude of the Russian military. I'll be honest with you. I was of the mindset, and maybe I bought into the drama, maybe I bought into the hype, but I thought the Russian military was going to be more modernized. I thought their troops would be better trained. I thought there would be more I thought they would fight more like us in a way. Like I thought there would be more to this. When I saw the invasion, I was like, oh, I feel bad for these Ukrainians because they're gonna get steamrolled. These guys will be in the capital taking it over. It'll be game over in a week. Wow. My assessment, along with everyone else's, got blown out of the water. I think very few people could have predicted what we're seeing today, where the Ukraine, this tiny country compared to the rest of Russia, is holding it down. Not only are they holding it down, they're winning against what should have been insurmountable odds. Before we started recording, Jack, I kind of shared with you, we all had this idea that Russia was this sleeping bear, and we all had this idea that China is this dragon of the East. We are seeing the emperor has no clothes. Emperor Putin is kind of sitting there on the international stage, kind of naked, watching the Russian military throw whatever they can at the wall to see what sticks. What are we learning from this, and what does this mean in the projections we had of China?
Yeah, I don't want to be too hasty in drawing conclusions. I think we're watching all of this happen in real time, and despite what people would like to say about verified information and authoritative data, I'm not sure that anyone really has that kind of data right now. I'm sure the intelligence community is assessing the situation as best they can, but it's going to take a long time to really study this conflict and see what the lessons learned are. But I think we can make some initial conclusions here that this is not unfolding the way that really anyone thought it would. And I was also one of those people. I did not think Russia would invade. And when they did, I said, oh my God, this is going to be over in 72 hours. And the Ukrainian army is going to get crushed and the government's going to collapse. Here we are more than a week later, and that has not happened. The Ukrainians have put up a stiff fight. The Russians have put up a anemic effort, showing an inability, an almost incomprehensible inability to plan and execute large-scale modern military operations. It's baffling. The Russian military has it's a recognizable, somewhat Western military, right? You have soldiers wearing uniforms and ranks, and they have tanks and airplanes and fighters and all these sorts of things that we recognize as Westerners, right? We recognize as part of a modern military. And they went through a military modernization process over the last 10 to 15 years. But I mean, I was speaking to a renowned expert on the Russian military the day before the invasion. And I don't think he foresaw it going anything like this. I don't think anyone thought it was going to be this bad, this incompetent. And we are seeing history unfold before our eyes right now. This is the biggest event of the 21st century thus far. This is bigger than 9/11 or the invasion of Iraq or the Soleimani strike. This is a huge geopolitical event that's unfolding, and that's going to change the outcome of the rest of this century, or it's going to influence the outcomes for the rest of this century. As far as China, I think we need to be very cautious in projecting Russia's performance in Ukraine on China and their potential performance in invading Taiwan. But I do think this is a moment to take a step back from a doctrinal perspective or a intelligence assessment or purely even an intellectual standpoint, to take a step back and reassess where we're at and why we assessed the Russians as such a confounding and insurmountable problem set for military planners and for our intelligence community. For a long time, we have kind of rested on these tropes of Putin as the chess master with this intelligence apparatus at his fingertips that can wage global operations seemingly undeterred by the West. We've seen a string of assassinations and acts of sabotage in Europe. We've seen them meddling in our election in 2016. Our government, and by extension, the American media, made it seem like we just could not get our act together, that these guys were impossible to counter. And then when an actual military confrontation with Russia broke out, we saw Ukraine, not Germany, not France, not the UK, not the United States, but Ukraine, putting up an effective resistance to the Russian military. Showing that Putin and Russia, Putin is just a person. Russia is just a nation. And we have blown these people and these structures, these institutions, into something in our mind that is almost magical in nature, that's imbued with these magical qualities, rather than seeing it in a pragmatic or materialist or realist sort of way. We've instead installed all of these images and ideas and tropes in our mind to help us explain what these faraway countries are and what they represent. And we have for many years issued these sorts of report cards on our foreign adversaries. I think right now we're seeing that many of those report cards describing Russia as a major adversary or a peer adversary is one of the terms that would get used, peer adversary. It is now clear, I think, that America has no peer adversary militarily, that we have no peer adversary, that Russia, and I would say this of China as well, that they cannot match us militarily. China is probably a significant threat to America economically, politically, socially, Using overall that the overarching umbrella of political warfare, China is a dire threat, perhaps, to the United States. But I think that we have to seriously consider if America does indeed have a peer threat, if there is a peer military threat, because right now I'm just not seeing it. Imagine if Russia actually did invade Western Europe or did invade a NATO nation, triggering an Article 5, which would result in the combined weight of NATO, all of these Western European militaries plus the United States fighting back. It is hard to see the Russians performing in any way in a conflict like that that is not abysmal.
I just read recently 95% of Russia's forces are concentrating on their attack on Ukraine. I think you make an interesting point, and that's something I was hesitant to say out loud, and it is that we are peerless. We have talked, and you just mentioned the near peer. That term near peer has been around for a long time, circulating amongst the DoD slideshows and whatnot. Near peer adversary, near peer engagements. But to your point, Russia has demonstrated to us that the one country with the two countries we thought were our near peers, Russia has demonstrated it is not even close. It is not even close. They may have numbers, but what we're seeing are Ukrainian soldiers taking over old equipment, ill-equipped soldiers, ill-trained soldiers. Some of these guys some of these Russian soldiers are saying that they didn't know they were invading a country. We thought we were doing a training exercise. Others are saying we were told we were here to liberate the Ukrainians from neo-Nazis. I don't know what the hell to believe. I'm captured. I don't know what to do now. I just want to. Did you see the video of the guy that called his mom? These Ukrainians, they were like, here, have a phone. Call your mom. Tell her that you're okay. This guy sobbing on TV. This is something you will not see American Joes on TV. Like, let me call my mommy. I feel bad.
They are performing about at the level of Saddam Hussein's military.
That's
pretty much where we're at.
We have just, when we're looking at the Russians, I don't want to say like we are so far beyond, but it sounds arrogant to say, and knock on wood, hopefully we're still wrong, but there's no competition anymore. We're seeing this for ourselves. Like this is not even a threat, but the threat,
not militarily, no,
not militarily, but I do want to bring up a question though, and sure, militarily not that much of a threat, but what about the nukes? Is that still? I think that's still a problem. I'm still kind of fearful that Putin's going to be like, well, it's not working out, so kaboom, let's do this thing. I wonder if his own people would let him do it.
Yeah, nuclear weapons, of course, or even weapons of mass destruction as a whole are still the ultimate checkmate, I think, in terms of preventing regime change in a country. And world leaders and some not so good people, some authoritarian leaders see that and know that. There's a whole question about the theory of nuclear warfare that probably I'm not equipped to fully unpack here, right? But the threat of nuclear weapons prevents this war from going so far, right? It's not going to go into Russia. You're never going to see something like that. And it protects their current regime in that way. But I don't think that a country would launch nuclear weapons, essentially initiating World War III, or maybe the final war, over a third country, right? So I don't think that Russia will initiate nuclear warfare over Ukraine. I don't think that China would initiate nuclear warfare over, Taiwan, much less like the Spratly Islands. I don't think that would happen. But if we did end up fighting on the Chinese mainland or in Russia itself, then yeah, that would get dicey really quick. But again, there are professionals who spend their entire life studying the sort of mutually assured destruction and the different theories and thresholds of how potential nuclear warfare would work.
My problem with that is that it's 2022. Nothing's off the freaking table, it seems. The experts that said Russia would take Ukraine in 72 hours, a week tops. That Putin would be sending Spetsnaz guys would be coming out of the ether and slitting throats and taking, counting bodies. That didn't happen. It feels like I'm hesitant to have an opinion.
We should all be cautious, right? We should all be cautious because the consequences of this war, I mean, even taking nuclear weapons out of the equation, are so dire and so catastrophic that we should all be smart and careful and cautious about how we think about this.
Now, one thing from the Ukraine-Russia story that we released last week, I liked that it set the stage for understanding Russia, understanding even Putin. That the collapse, and I think it was John that said it, and it caught my ear, and it's resonated with me since I heard that, was that the collapse of the Soviet Union was worse than World War II, was worse than everything the Russians had experienced up to that point combined. Talking about the loss of life, loss of industry, the loss of identity, that the collapse of the Soviet Union, we can backtrack today's events right back to that moment when the Iron Curtain fell. With Putin in the position that he's in, a direct result of that collapse, can we divine anything going into the future with that in mind? Like, this is a byproduct of the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Well, I think the big lesson to take away from that is, what Jan said was, from a Russian perspective, it's let's never, ever do that again, because that was so bad. Understandably, right? So I think that means the Russian people are very hesitant about regime change. It's not to say they wouldn't take like swap out presidents, like, okay, Putin, you had a good run, now it's time to retire, and this other guy is going to move in. I mean, I think they would accept that, but the Russian people have from what I understand and what it strikes me from my point of view, is they have a very deep-seated need for stability in their country, and would not ever want to see them, go back to a time that they experienced, when the Soviet Union collapsed, for instance.
And speaking of the the Russian people. Speaking of the Russian people, though, you just finished saying they don't want to experience this level of uncertainty, this level of flux, but they're getting that right now, according to Western media, because I am a firm believer that we are all participants in an information warfare game. We are all, witting or unwitting. We're all getting our news from certain sources, and they're adding whatever spin they want to add to it. But for the most part, it would seem that the Russians are suffering economically. The ruble is now up, I think it's like 200 to 1 or some nonsense like that. Apple Pay, Apple shut down their pay services. Google shut down their pay services. I saw lines of Russians at subways trying to scan their phones. Nothing's working. And if life couldn't get any worse, Netflix shut off their services, and Warner Brothers says, like, no Batman for you. You're not getting this. But, jokes aside, the Western world is essentially it's almost like it's an economic sanction that's not even part of the official government. Everybody's sanctioning the Russian people for Putin's actions. Is this like, to me, it feels like maybe a version of the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is a collapse of the Putin regime, and the Soviet people are going to suffer for it.
It could be something like that. I mean, I think it's too soon to tell. As a authoritarian leader, Putin has a lot of um, a staying power that democratic leaders certainly wouldn't have. But it's a dangerous situation because right now the Russians are being so humiliated in Ukraine. Um, the way that you're seeing all these aircraft being shot down, armored vehicles being destroyed, you're seeing guys abandon, main battle tanks and take off. Guys, soldiers running out of gas and having to abandon their vehicles. I mean, this is a national humiliation that Russia is not going to recover from in our lifetimes. And because of that, the Russian government and the military are going to want to turn this war around and get a win. How are they going to do that? I mean, it remains unclear. A lot of us assume that they're going to turn Kiev into Grozny or Aleppo. That carries with it a pretty steep political cost as well. The Russian people have an affinity for Ukraine. Kiev was like the birthplace of Russian civilization, essentially. So leveling that place is not going to go over well in the psyche of Russia either. Then add all these sanctions on, sort of the economic turmoil that has been created, while the Russian government throws more and more resources at a failed strategy in Ukraine. I don't know where that ends, but I think nothing good is going to come from it. That's for sure. And you're right that it may be a turning point for Putin's regime. Yeah.
Where are we going with the next episode? So we set the historical preface by talking a lot about the history of the Soviet Union. We've talked a lot about Putin's very human side. I can't stress that enough, that if you got nothing out of that episode, you should have walked away with understanding that Putin is not a KGB spy master extraordinaire working 50 steps ahead of everybody. This is a very vulnerable person who's in a very vulnerable position, especially now. And we talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union. So what's the next step in the Future War series with Russia?
So episode 2, I interviewed Mark Gagliotti I interviewed him actually the day before the invasion started. So Mark is an expert on the Russian military, Russian organized crime, in the Russian Special Operations Forces. So we discuss all of that stuff in depth, as well as some analysis of President Putin in the run up to the invasion. Literally, it brings us right up to the day before the invasion. And then I interviewed Tim Weiner, who is a American journalist and historian who wrote history books about the CIA, FBI, and more recently about political warfare between Russia and the United States. And so we have a conversation about how the West has been fighting back against Russia after the invasion by waging political warfare. And we'll talk about what political warfare is. How do you define it? What are the various aspects of it? And again, how we're seeing a watershed moment in global history right now. That's going to make up episode 2.
All right, folks, I'm Rod Rodriguez. That's Jack Murphy. Make sure you like, listen, and subscribe. Leave us a review on Apple. Follow us on Twitter. And, this is, and I know it's really strange. We sometimes look at the news and really easy to treat it like a football game, because this is something that's happening 1,000 miles away to people that you don't think about or people you don't know. But this is a real war. This is real people dying every day. And let's not dehumanize the Russians either. These are Russian soldiers being told to go into a fight that they are ill prepared for. 10,000 plus, I think, is the number. I want you to consider, if you're a service member, you're a veteran, imagine hearing that 10,000 troops died in the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 10,000. how many people is that? Is that a brigade, 2 brigades? I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of people to be thrown into the meat grinder. These are human beings, so keep some perspective.
And just to be clear, I mean, I have no issue whatsoever with Russian soldiers, aside from the fact that they're in Ukraine. My real issue is with these party goons in Moscow. I don't have any issue with Russian soldiers. I just don't think they should be there, and please send them home, because there's no reason why they need to be dying in Ukraine. There's no reason whatsoever for it.
And the last thing I'll leave you with, folks, is be careful who you're sending your money to. There's a lot of organizations out there asking for your money, asking for your help in assisting folks in the Ukraine. Just be very cognizant. Pay attention to who you're giving your money to. And before you decide to go buy some sappy plates, get on a plane and go throw yourself into the fight.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. And if you are, and some of you I can't talk out of, but if you are, do your doggone research. Do your research. Understand there are consequences for your security clearance. There are consequences to your life the minute you go and fight for a country that is not the United States of America. There's a lot to consider. So just be very cognizant about what you're doing and how you're doing it. But that's it for me. That's Jack Murphy. We will see you at the next episode.